kinds of programs, but the first step is always going to be identify that you have a problem, accept that you have a problem. Because there's no fixing of a problem unless you see that you have a problem. So like, for example, the person who's a drug addict that is like, oh, I can stop whenever I want, you know, I just do this whenever I feel like. That person can't fix the problem because they don't see it as a problem, right? So what happens to a lot of times is that people benefit so much, or they perceive that they benefited from their life in America, that they're like, I don't see what the problem is. You know, they're comfortable. And I will say that complacency and comfort is probably the greatest enemy for Muslims in that situation. Because once you start to feel comfortable, you can't see the problems. It's hard to see what are people complaining about. I'm living in my house in the suburbs and I'm going to school, or, you know, I have a good job, I'm well-to-do. Like, you know, why are these people always complaining? You know, what is the problem? Like, okay, those some bad people, some bad apples, you know, that kind of thing. And it becomes very hard to see the problem if you're comfortable and complacent. Think about revolutions, right? Revolutions happen when people are like, man, I'm tired of this crap. I'm not taking this anymore. You know, we're standing up against whatever the injustice is. We're going to do whatever we need to do. We're going to organize. We're going to fight against. That is when people feel the discomfort. They feel the injustice. So what happens if you don't feel that is that it's very easy to become complacent mentally, and you're not motivated to try to fix something or change something, or even to see, you know, the problem. I remember hearing like people white friends say something like, you know, when Donald Trump got elected president, they say something like, oh my God, I think America is racist. You just woke up to that reality in 2016. Like, literally, I've been living this my whole life. I mean, like, you can go back, like, this is not something new. They didn't just cook this up. This meal has been being served for a very long time. But when you're in the silos and you become distant, and that's one of the ways of becoming distant from that reality. And I think that if we look at the approach of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he made it a point to be connected to all everyone in society, not just the upper echelon, not just those who are well-to-do. You know, this is something that I think is probably really important, as a kind of lesser, I hear less talked about, or maybe lesser known, but it's a scholarly view that after Karbala, right, that, you know, this tragic event happens. You know, Imam Husayn alayhi salam is murdered, and this tragic event happens to the Muslim Ummah, really. And then there's the event in Sham, and I know that you are all very familiar with what transpired and all of that. How did Islam, how was it sustained afterwards? Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, one of the key ways in how Islam was sustained was through the converts of that time. And there were a tremendous number where Imam Sajjad, people who were enslaved, where he would free them just and educate, and these would become the advocates and propagators of Islam. You know, and so this that idea of being connected to people who were considered in that society as being the lowest, was that connection as one of the things which enabled to be able to fix the problems. Being disconnected is one of the things which I really think is one of the detriments, you know, to the Muslim community, is that, you know, we sometimes socially, economically disconnected from the people who are most likely to want Islam, most likely to want to hear those teachings, most likely to seek and want that solution and the justice that what Islam offers, especially if practiced properly. So what needs to happen is we need to be re-educated, right? We need to get really re-educated and throw out of our mind everything we think we know about the way that Islam just is, in the sense of like this traditional very cultural Islam. We need to really distance ourselves away from that and make sure that we're looking at Islam and learning it objectively. That is the only way that it'll ever be relevant in this society. Trying to translate and transplant Islam from back home to in America in this different context is not going to be beneficial for us. And it's not what Islam is. Islam is a religion that's always going to be relevant in every day, in every space, in every time, in every era, in every location. Because it's always relevant, we have to look at it objectively in that context. What is Islam saying about the situation right here? You know, every single aspect of that. So being able to re-educate ourselves on that, I really, you know, what's one of the things that stands out to me is Imam Ali alayhi salam's final will and testament. Like, it's just, if somebody has a chance and can just look it up and post it in the chat, that'd be awesome. But Imam Ali's, in his will to his children, he mentions that, first of all, he says this writing is for whoever this reaches, you know, for my children, وَمَنْ بَلَغَهُ كِتَابِي, whoever this writing reaches, this is for them. Meaning what? This is a message for you and I. This is a message for us. That Imam Ali is clearly saying that it's timeless. And he goes on to say in a lot of things, but one of the key things is كُونَ لِلظَّالِمِينَ خَصْمًا وَلِلْمَظْلُومِ عَوْنًا. Stand in opposition of the zalim, of the oppressor, and be a helper and support of those who are oppressed. So if I'm a Muslim, it doesn't matter the context of where I'm living. Am I standing against the zalim and am I standing against the mazloom? Shaykh Mutahari has a beautiful, beautiful clip on YouTube somewhere where it's a translation of it also is there, where he talks about Shimra and Bruzato Bishnas. Know your Shimra of today. Right? Don't get stuck in this idea that Karbala is this legend and we just stuck in that time and era and not connect the dots with, okay, who's your Yazid today? Who is your Shem today? Who are the people who are the Zalimeen today? Because if you're not able to identify him, then you haven't understood Karbala at all.
Jazakallah. So how can we go about determining, because there are a bunch of ways that you can go about, you know, being active in society, standing with, you know, the people who are the most oppressed and standing for the right thing. And there are a lot of different issues going on. How can we determine sort of where we stand? Where do we start?
That's a good question, you know, and I think it goes back to understanding this system. I don't think we a lot of times understand the zone that is a part of this system. I don't think we truly do. You know, here's an example. I mean, a lot of what has to happen is just education in the beginning. A lot of what has to happen is becoming educated. When you have Muslims on both sides, like, you know, spending all of their energy in I mean, like, looking at the numbers, it was something like 60-40 and voting for like Trump and Biden, and amongst Muslims, which speaks to a lot of, you know, different views and understandings. But it speaks to a bigger problem, is that we don't see the system as the problem, we see the system as the solution. We see that this system is a means of fixing the system. It's literally a paradox. But we don't see the problems in the system. But that's what we have to delve into. Education, for example, right? This not to mention that, you know, it's watching with someone the some documentary or book or something, and it was talking about Ruby Bridges. So she's like the first African American when schools became integrated. The first person, this young girl, like 6 years old, who had to be escorted by the FBI to go to this all-white school, and people protesting and shouting and calling her names and everything like that in the process. This wasn't ancient history. Like, she's alive and doesn't even look very old. And so in people's minds, there's this idea that America, slavery, bad stuff, that was a long time ago. And now everything is justice and freedom for all. But we need to get the ideas out of our head. No, that was really literally, a lot of people are still alive that experienced that. This woman is literally still alive. This is an ancient history. So we have to get ourselves into understanding. Education system, another thing. Education system is primarily funded how? By your property taxes, which means that you need to understand what redlining is. Redlining means that, it's a system that's established to keep Black people in a certain neighborhood. And so you can't come and live in the suburbs. You can't even come there. You're not even allowed to. And so this kind of injustice in the system perpetuates these problems. Then the funding of schools is going to be funded only by, it's going to be funded primarily by property taxes. So if you live in a poor neighborhood, then obviously you're not going to have a lot of property tax or home value to be able to fund your education. It's a whole system, but this is a big picture of so many of the problems. This is an injustice. This is a huge injustice. The idea of police brutality, right? There was a time when people really, really thought that like police brutality, no, that only happens to bad people. I remember I was literally sitting down with some friends, and these are well-educated people, you know what I mean? They were children of immigrants, but well-educated. No, they themselves were immigrants, I'm sorry. They were well-educated, though, young people, really, smart, did well in school, graduated, very professional jobs, and all of this. Kind of living the American dream, so to speak. And anyway, so we're having a conversation at dinner, and we're talking about, yeah, I really don't get what's going on within the Black community. All these people are always getting arrested and always going to jail. And so I said that, actually, no, they went on to kind of qualify that with like, why can't like these people be more like you? You know what I mean? Like, you're a good person, you're African American, and you're good, and you're educated, and you're smart, and you're articulate, and yada yada yada. And I said, like, well, I've been arrested too. Like literally, you must have their hearts must have just dropped. Like, oh my God, not you! What did you do? And tried to explain, like, you don't really have to do anything. Like, you have to just exist in this Black skin, and that's what's going to happen to you. Like, that's real life. Like I said, I literally, I don't know a single African American male personally that's never been either arrested or harassed by law enforcement. I don't know, not a single one. And so this like really like had their minds exploding because they were not understanding what this system is. And so when you don't understand the system, it becomes very, very hard to be able to say like, what should I do? I don't even understand what's wrong. So I think a lot of emphasis on educating ourselves into what is wrong with the system is a very important first step. Then there's a lot of things that can be done and that we should do, especially as Muslims, and we should be proactive in, but it's very half-hearted, I'll say, for sometimes when people get active and they're doing it for the sake of doing it versus actually understanding, So like the whole world is protesting, since George Floyd incident, and so I'm going to a protest, but I don't really understand what systematic racial injustice is like. I have no idea what that means in the medical field. Like you can just, there's so much that you can unpack that is just, it's unlimited. In the medical field, literally it's very well recorded. I had some books that I shared about, but it talks about things like, for example, Tuskegee experiment. And you can look all these things up. I have a video where I kind of outline some different racial injustice kind of topics and books that kind of help a person to understand a little bit more about this system, because that's a big part of how this injustice, how it unfolds into so many different aspects. And one of the, I'm not sure if it's in that one or not actually, but there's some books that talk about the different medical things that were done that were against African Americans. Things like, for example, just like the idea of eugenics, like literally statistics and the science of statistics, a lot of it in this country is rooted in that idea of how can we prove that Black people are inferior, to justify why they should be slaves and why there's white. The closer you're, the proximity to whiteness means that you're less likely, you're more smarter, you're more this, that these features and bone structures and this mean this. Books and books and books on all of these things. These are things that we have to understand. If we don't understand this, then it doesn't make sense to us, the injustices in the medical field. The injustices that exist when it comes to health insurance and things like that. And what happens when people don't understand? They start to see the person who is oppressed as actually being the symptom of his own circumstance. They say, well, bootstrap mentality. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You should get it together. America's the land of opportunity. If somebody's getting arrested, it's probably their fault. They probably did something bad. If somebody's not getting an education, well, they're probably dumb. If somebody start to think about these, what do they call this in the education world? We call it deficit thinking. We start to have a mentality of looking at things as being deficient inherently. And we can't see the circumstances as causing this problem. We look at the person as being the problem. That's the beginning of, us never being able to fix the solution. So there are a lot of things, practical things, but I can't emphasize enough, being educated about the system is going to be the major first step into being able to, fix it. I think we have a question.
I just wanted to say something. No, I just wanted to say that it's like a lot of times people think it's inherited, but it's also where you're living in your social class and how your parents were and how you were raised. So a lot of times the lower class people, like into the socially, like they're in the lower class, they see their parents and how they're raised. And because I'm studying again my health class, they're teaching us that a worker, like a person that is in the lower class, they go home and they teach their kids to become followers, because they were their job requirements are like at the level of they need to follow someone else. They like have a leader above them. And then like the middle class family tells their kids when they get home, oh, like they raise them to be like leaders in higher class, because that just shows that like it's like the future generation that's being affected. So I think it's very important that education is highly like suggested, but like at the same time we have to understand that sometimes parents, they need to, like, I guess you could say, like, agree on the fact that right now I'll do what I can, but I also need to consider like my kids' futures, because their kids' futures are going to be affected. So it's also like economic levels as well, that we need to consider like who we should prioritize, and like the health system as well, because health is very important. Everything is affected with like health, and like your mental health, your physical health, and that's just something that I wanted to add.
So that's an interesting point. There's this article that it's called cultural capital or something like that. It's Yasso article. Talking about this idea of how, I mean, and it's an attempt to try to put a lens on looking at those who come from lower socioeconomic level, oftentimes people of color, and trying to create some kind of equilibrium. But I mean, it has its flaws, or at least it seems to have its flaws in the article as well. But for example, it talks about how, like, okay, well, you have these other kinds of capital. Okay, maybe you don't have, you know, finances or socioeconomic status, but you have cultural capital. You have this aspirational capital. And it outlines some other kind of things that it considers to be different forms of assets to help a person to navigate. It kind of doesn't focus on the idea that in reality, the circumstances of society dictate a lot of things. If they are like, for example, like if you grew up in a situation where you weren't allowed to live certain places, you weren't allowed to work certain jobs, then it's not, a lot of it is not your choice, you know? Even like, you know, like there's an article about a guy who is getting a home loan, right? And so he's, or trying to refinance rather. And he's African-American. I think his wife or his girlfriend is white. He goes to refinance and he keeps getting rejected, you know? And so finally he changes the only one thing on the application, that instead of putting African-American, put that he's Caucasian or white, and voila, now you're magically approved. You know what I mean? Like, this is not like old news. This is literally from months ago or whatever. And the banks, they have, so many of them have been sued because that is how they were teaching their loan officers to operate. Like, literally, it doesn't matter. He's making 6 figures and he couldn't get approved, you know, excellent credit, but couldn't get approved because it was like, you know, if people come in and they're Black or, you know, Hispanic probably, then, you know, kind of give them the runaround, tell them we're not looking to refine, we're not and things like that. These kind of circumstantial things, there's a lot in your, that you can do, but these kind of circumstantial things, like, what do you do about that? You know, if you go home at the end of the day and you're, you come from this impoverished family, there's so many variables and circumstances. Do you have food to eat on the table? Like, you have an immediate need. You know, I was at this social, not social justice, environmental justice kind of event, you know, and the main focus was climate change at this university. And so they're talking about climate change and the issues and the numbers and the statistics and things like that. And I was trying to explain, like, you know, when your concern is what to eat, you know what I'm saying, like literally how to live, climate change is very far removed from your on your priority list. When your primary concern is, I hope that I don't get shot on my way walking, you know what I'm saying, then climate change is like, it's not gonna make the cut, you know? And there's so many things like that that don't get to be prioritized because of the just the nature of the circumstances of where you live. And again, those circumstances are not often by choice. I mean, I encourage people to read the Michelle, what's her name? The new Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander. Understand how the issues that happened, like when after slavery in this country, you know, I mean, like, not just the idea of slavery, like the 1-drop rule, where if you have 1 drop of non-white blood in you, essentially, then you're damned to hell, and you can't get into those places of privilege, those schools, those in academia. You want to be a doctor, you can't be a doctor. You can't go to medical school. So, like, fighting uphill battle, this didn't go away. Right now, even right now today, there are still barriers that exist, but they look differently. And so I think that understanding that how these barriers are still very much existent, you know, are something that is that's not the fault of the person on a lower economic status, or it's not because of their aspirations necessarily. It's because they have an uphill battle. And sometimes, you know, the getting constantly denied, that affects how you look at things. Things like not seeing yourself in things, you know. So like I'm not a huge Obama fan, disclaimer, but for a lot of African Americans, seeing someone who is visibly Black in a position of authority, or what's perceived to be the highest position of authority in the land, that gave them confidence that, oh, that's actually something achievable. And whereas not seeing these things constantly reiterates that, you know. And I mean, Muslims we're not great when it comes to this. You can look at like books, like, you know, activity books. There's some great, you know, Sunday school books, for example. When you look at the images of the people and the kids, like all of them, they kind of look the same. They kind of have this kind of one person that looks Middle Eastern, and everybody looks exactly the same. They're exactly the same complexion. Like there are Muslims from other places or other complexions, right? So let's say that I'm growing up and I'm looking at that. And I'm African American. I have dark skin, and I'm looking at that. I never see myself as, you know, in any of these pictures. I never see myself in any of these images, even the images which are highly disputed about their accuracy, that are images that are promoted and kind of accepted in some places as images of the imams. Like they have a very particular kind of look, you know. Even if it says that their mother was African, they still have this very particular kind of, you know, I don't know, Aryan, European kind of, I don't know, Persian-esque look. And so is this the image which I push down people's throat, or what is that going to cause psychologically? So I'm talking about looking at this whole picture. When you see those kind of things, what does that do for you thinking that what kind of job you can have? What kind of person? When you see a Barbie and it's Barbie doctor, Barbie this, Barbie that, but just till recently, all of those Barbies were white and they had blonde hair. You know what I mean? So the image for a young girl is that that's what I need to aspire to. Look at any princess, every Disney princess for the longest had to be some white girl that was doing something she wasn't supposed to be doing and get saved by somebody, whatever. But all of these, again, what is that image of what this perfection is, what this honor is? Those kind of elements have as much of an impact on someone who is trying to aspire. It doesn't tell the whole story of what their parents are telling them at home. I think it doesn't really tell half of the story. I would say contend actually that a lot of parents say the opposite, but they also understand that, look, realistically, you might not have a chance to reach these kind of goals and these kind of places. It's not that they don't have, you know, aspirations. I remember if you've ever read, and I highly encourage you to read, Autobiography of Malcolm X. He talks about when he was in school. Now look at all of these elements and these how they affected him too, right? There's society and all of these things, the family structure being destroyed, you know, house getting burned down, all these things because you're Black, you know, the elements of injustice in society. He says, you know, I want to be a lawyer, right? Smart, articulate, like he literally was giving lectures at all of these universities in France, you know, all over the world. Like he definitely had this prowess and natural for him in his articulation and things like that. Teacher tells him what, you know, oh, no, that's not a job for a Negro. I don't need you to think about cleaning something or carpentry or whatever it is that he told them. You know, those kind of lessons that are taught directly or indirectly, those are the things that shape what was his trajectory after that. You know what, man, screw this system. You know what, I'm just going to, you know, what's available to me, what's out on the street, quick money, you know, drugs, these kind of things, promotes that, you know, all of those kind of elements. So I think it's a very, very big picture. And oftentimes it's looked at in a very particular lens. I always question, you know, what is the motive of like those assumptions, you know, that are being made. Sorry for that long rant.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's just like I just like learned that recently, and I
Yeah.
thought it would apply to, and I just wanted to share. But
Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you.
Thank you for sharing that very much. Thank you.
Definitely, definitely. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So zooming out a little bit, and just going a little bit more basic, what Islamically, what does it mean to be a member of a society? What rights do people have over us? What obligations do we have to give back to the other members of our society? What does that mean, and what do how is that talked about in the Quran and exemplified by the Ahlul Bayt?
So the most important element is going to be the element of justice. That's going to be the most important and most key element. And I think the ayah in Surah Nisa, I think is 135. It talks about be just even if it's against yourself. If it's against your family, if it's against, like, it's such a powerful verse. Someone find that and share that in the chat. It's such a powerful verse that's saying that justice is this foundation. Imam Ali literally says, he talks about how it's the foundation which upholds the entire universe. You remove justice, when injustice becomes the norm and acceptable, that zulm becomes acceptable, that is when the problems happen in any sphere. In a person's marriage, in a person's family, in a person's business partnership, in a person's personal life. It starts with being justice. We say in we read in Dua Kumail, right? Zalamtu nafsi, zalamtu nafsi, zalamtu nafsi. I did injustice to myself. Allah forgive me for the injustice that I did to myself. Injustice, even if it's to yourself. This is one of the most catastrophic things. It's the opposite of the justice that leads a person to their salvation and their success. And so the same thing goes with this, in society. We have a duty to divine justice. Be very clear. Because we have to differentiate between what Allah is defined as justice, including social justice, versus what you're going to read about in academia or in this world of what social justice is, right? We have to differentiate because we might not always agree on that. That's something that people are advocating today. We might not agree with that. That from an Islamic standpoint, this is a form of justice or injustice. Here, there's things that are promoted in this society that we don't agree with, that we consider a transgression. Here in this society, you can drink alcohol. You have to be a certain age. You can go to bars, you can go to clubs, you can do these things. From an Islamic standpoint, we will look at that as being problematic. That's actually a form of injustice. Usury, and this kind of riba, where, as long as you can take advantage and you get yours in business, then that's okay. But Islam says, no, that's not okay. That's a type of problem. That's an injustice. When it comes to family life, there's a structure. And the society will say that, no, if you want to, whoever wants to marry whoever, you want to marry, a guy wants to marry a guy wants to marry a cat, a girl wants to marry, themselves. Like, these are literally things, that are in this society. Hey, that's okay. Islam might have a different view about what is considered okay and acceptable. So I think that understanding, first of all, what does Islam say? What does Islam call fair? What does Islam call just? And then being advocates of that. There's a lot of room where, it's there are things in society where Islam is not against everything, in society because it's Western, for example. No, there's a lot of things where Islam is okay with, like, just it's a matter of whatever the speed limit. Islam is not saying, like, oh no, the speed limit is haram or something. No, like, those are social laws and rules that are necessary to exist. When does it become a problem? If the laws themselves promote injustice, or they serve as a means to harm people, for people to be harmed, then that's a problem. Then that's going to be a problem. Where do Muslims stand? We stand on the side of what Islam says, because that's the only solution for the ills of society. I mean, let's think about this. In this country, just something very simple. Voting rights, right? Women didn't have a right to vote, right? In this country. If you were a person of color, you didn't have a right to vote. And these were things that were considered completely fine. They were considered completely legal. They were considered completely just. They were considered laws that should be upheld, right? People said that there's a problem with them, and they went about ways to try to change that. From the get-go, if I'm standing on the side of Islam at that time, I'm already seeing the flaw in these things, because I'm saying, well, Islam doesn't have this barrier, because I'm looking at it from an Islamic lens, Islam being the solution in this society. No, Islam doesn't have a barrier where you're demoted because of the color of your skin. Islam doesn't have a barrier where you're demoted because of your gender. No, Islam has this kind of justice and fairness in this sense. So I think that that's the primary thing, is for us to understand what Islam says about justice, then compare that to whatever society is saying and whatever society is promoting, for us to be able to be on the same page.
Jazakallah. Thank you for that, Shaykh. So you talked earlier about Karbala and how the message of Karbala went forward with Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. Can you talk a little bit about how we can channel that, what we mourn for every year, into our actual daily lives in terms of justice? Because a lot of times I feel like we get caught up in commemorating Karbala, but that's not the end in and of itself, right? That should be a means to an end. So how can we do that?
Absolutely. I'm going to sound like a broken record if I say education again, and we have to educate ourselves. But at the risk of sounding like that, I have to say that that's probably pretty important, because if we haven't understood the essence of what Imam Husayn did and why. Like, for example, did Imam Husayn alayhi salam sacrifice in that way that he did in Karbala so that I could cry? Was that his purpose and goal? Was he thinking to himself, man, one day I really hope that Husayn Mekki weeps for me? That's furthest thing from his mind and heart. It was, as he said, Imam Husayn alayhi salam, upholding the teachings of the Quran, the religion, professing the religion of truth and justice, right? So where am I in terms of that, professing the religion of truth and justice? And I mind you, not religion in the way that is defined here. Religion is this compartmentalized definition of what you do on Sunday or Friday or Saturday or on this very specific holiday or this one particular thing. That's not religion. No. Islam didn't come to say, do this on this day, that day, period, and that's it. Islam is a way of life. So when it says that the job of the Imam, Imam Husayn alayhi salam says, is to profess the religion of truth, it means the way of life that is the right way to live. That is what he means. So what was happening at the time, the wrong way of life, the social injustices, alcoholism, lewdness, becoming social norms, he was advocating against the social injustices. He was speaking out against them. So if I don't understand what he stood for, and if I'm not trying to follow what he stood for, then my tears are irrelevant. My majlis sitting is irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. It doesn't mean anything. What is the value of that? That would mean that I was listening to Imam Husayn and not fighting alongside him, right? There's a group of people like that. It says those people who are cursed, who qatalat, who murdered you, and those who sami'at wa radiyat bih. They heard and they were content. They were okay. We would be in that group of people. At least we're just hearing what Imam Husayn did, and we're okay with whatever the circumstances is that we're living because we're comfortable. Our Wi-Fi is working. Our internet is working. We have this and that. We have clothes. We have food. Our bellies are full, and so we're good. We're not concerned about the problems in the world because of that. That wasn't Imam Husayn's truth. And he advocated in that way. So we have to really understand, what did Imam Husayn alayhi salam stand for? How did he stand up? What was he willing to sacrifice to be able to do that? If we don't do those things, then we haven't truly understood. And going back to the idea of, you've heard the famous, it's not a hadith, but it is a quote, every day is Ashura and every place is Karbala, right? Oh, but we don't see America as Karbala, though. No, we're like every other place is Karbala. That's over there in, that's in Palestine, or that's in, some Middle Eastern country where there's a war. It's not in America or in Canada or something like that. No, it's not in Europe. We have this kind of view that we can't still see that this land here, right here, is Karbala. We can't see that there's injustice happening right in front of our face, and that is what becomes the problem. And if we don't see it, then we definitely can't stand up against the injustices as Imam Husayn alayhi salam did.
Jazakallah. Thank you for that, Shaykh. So coming to the Imam of our time currently, we hear a lot about intidar and the way that we are supposed to be in an active state of awaiting the Imam. And out of sight, out of mind, it's very easy not to be connected. Of course, at the time of Karbala, taking a stand looked a certain way. In terms of, those who were quiet versus those who joined him. What does that look like now during the ghaiba of the Imam? Because obviously we don't have the Imam in front of us.
True. It looks like the people of Kufa. Let me explain something. Two things that are very important. One is, when Imam Husayn alayhi salam sent his representative, to Kufa, because Kufans had invited him, we need an Imam, reported 18,000 letters, like a lot of support, right? He goes there. He's trying to go there. He sends Muslim ibn Aqil forward. When Muslim gets there, there are thousands of people with him at one point. Thousands of people who are in the streets with him. Like they're protesting. He's rallying the troops, basically. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, who's Yazid's representative in Kufa, starts to threaten these people. He threatened them with taking away their state allotment, their welfare. And when that happened, so these thousands of people, they started going down. Mothers came and said, hey, it's not your fight. You don't have to worry about it. Don't get mixed up in all of this stuff. And they started to go away. More people started to walk away. Got to the point where there were a few hundred people left. All these people afraid of losing their comforts, perceived comforts, right? Because they'll be burning in hell maybe tomorrow, and those things won't be worth it. But they're perceived comforts. And they were afraid of that. If I do this, I stand with Imam Husayn, I might lose out on this or that or my comforts and that I have. By the time he went to pray, he said there were 30 people, right? By the time he finished praying, there was nobody of these thousands of people, not a one that was down for the cause, that was ready to say, you know what? I'm here. I'm ready. Labaik, right? No, they didn't want to lose, those comforts. And so that complacency that I spoke about earlier is the biggest, most detrimental, most dangerous thing that can really hurt us. You know, I remember this. I was talking to a brother. He said, you know, back in my country, you know, I used to live in Iraq, and during the time of Saddam, there were so much difficulty. Like, you couldn't go to the masjid. They would have surveillance. They would count how many times you're going to the masjid. You know, are you one of those religious folks? You know, they would have all these details about you, and surveillance and tapping phones and this and that, all kinds of things going on. And he said, you know, at least when I came to, you know, whatever Western country that they went to, that, you know, at least now we have at least some democracy and some freedom. And that's their perception. So now it's comfortable. I don't know if you saw that recently. Someone shared with me, the military or U.S. government, they were getting the data from some app, from some Salat app or something. Like, how many times are you praying? We really want to know. Like, that wouldn't cross my mind as like the first thing as your counterintelligence or whatever it is, that's important. How much do these people pray? Who's listening? Who's sending their Salat or their Adhan app or whatever it is? But it was just interesting. That, like, do you think that the surveillance went away? No. The scary thing is the surveillance is 1,000 times more than whatever your family experienced in Iraq. In realities, you know, read about the NSA, Snowden, all this stuff. You know, do you think that you're just like, you know, completely free? No, the illusion is scarier than when it's out in the open. You know, you're comfortable now with this surveillance. You're comfortable that, you know, Google has stated on record that 98% of the time, if the FBI asks us for information about anyone, we give it to them. 98% of the time, right? So you're okay with that surveillance, right? And but you're calling out and you're afraid of what back home it looked like this or that. That complacency is pretty scary to me. The idea that you're in this idea of perceived comfort, and so you can't see that the enemy is like, you know, sure, go to the masjid, you know, and that's your idea of you're having, you know, freedom or things like that. Another point that I want to make is that there's a responsibility. Okay, actually, this could be 2 parts. One part of that is that we have an idea that if you live in a Muslim land and you leave that Muslim land to live in a non-Muslim land, there's something called ta'arrub ba'da al-hijrah, leaving the Muslim lands if you lose your faith in the non-Muslim land. So I'm living in a Muslim land, I'm able to pray and wear hijab, etc. I go to this non-Muslim land and I'm not able to do those things, or I'm not able to do them well. The diminishment in my faith makes living there not permissible. So there's a lot of Muslims who their presence in the United States and in Canada and Europe and places like this is absolutely problematic. Really got no business here. Absolutely none. According to this, if that's what's happening. Now, if you're maintaining your faith, and not just maintaining, but also propagating and sharing the message of the Ahlul Bayt, then and only then is your presence okay. Outside of that, it's a no business situation. I literally was talking to a brother, he was from Albania, came to the States, grew up Muslim, came to me and he's like, you know, he wanted to meet with me or something, talk to me. I said, you know, come meet me at the masjid. You know, it's a while back, obviously, pre-COVID. Come meet me at the masjid. You know, we could talk after the program. He comes to, you know, actually came after the program. Anyway, I hung around, waited for him. He finally showed up. And he's like, you know, oh, Shaykh, you know, I'm really having these problems with my family, my kids, this and that. You know, they're really doing a lot of haram and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, you know, inshallah, we can try to get to the crux of the problem and talk about it. Or do you want to talk to them? Oh, no, 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 no. I don't think they will talk to you because, you know, they really don't like Islam. I don't think they're Muslim anymore. Like, okay. What do I just sit down and talk to you and your wife? My wife's not Muslim and da, 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 da. She doesn't want to talk. Okay. Why don't you try to do X, Y, Z? Yeah, I was really thinking that maybe you could just write some dua and, you know, I could just stick it under their pillow or put something in their tea and then they're going to magically, you know, sprinkle that mullah dust that you have under your abba and let's make them everything right. You know, like, what, I'm like, bro, it doesn't work like this. This is not how it works. You know, I said, you know, do you try to read, you know, these ayats of Quran? I don't have a Quran. You literally don't have a Quran in your house? Okay, you have an app, you know, or something, like it's the age of internet. It's like, okay, you know, but I really don't know how to read Quran anymore. I forgot how to read since I came here. Been here for 30 something years. Forgot how to read Quran. Doesn't have a Quran in his house. I offered him a Quran. Brother, take this one. You know what I mean? Bismillah. You know, maybe this will be the start, you know, of a different path. At least, you know, you have a Quran in your house. The existence of a Quran in your house is its own barakat. No, I really don't think I want to take that. Like, oh, wow. Like, you think about, like, sometimes those hadith that it talks about, like, when people turn away from their blessing, you know, Allah's trying to give them something good, and they like, no, I don't want this something that's good for me. And he wouldn't take it. He wouldn't do anything at all. He just was looking for me to do some magic potion or something like that. He wasn't interested in even having a Quran in his house. Well, this person who's saying that my kids have all these problems and doing haram, what do you think is going to happen? You know, you're not practicing. What do you think is going to happen to your children? So in that case, when a person themselves either is not practicing or is not practicing as well as they could, or their children are not practicing any longer, their family is not practicing or not practicing as well as they should, their existence and presence in this non-Muslim state is problematic. They left Darul Islam, the Muslim lands, to go to Darul Kufr, the non-Muslim lands. If they are losing their faith or their children are losing their faith, their existence there is haram. This is a huge, huge statement, to the point where I'm going to share with you one of the hadiths that talks about this, and it really kind of puts into perspective, like, not just that it is haram or unlawful, but the level of haram in which it is, like, to what degree, what's the problem, where does it fall? So there's a hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam where he says that the major sins, the kaba'ir, sab'atun. Pay attention closely, everyone. If you want to, please take notes, but just pay close attention. This is important. The great sins are 7. 1, ascribing a partner to Allah, shirk. Got that? Shirk is number 1. Number 2, qatlun nafs muta'ammidan, murdering someone intentionally is one of the great sins. Obviously, we have sins that are considered smaller, relatively speaking, and some that are the great, incredible sins, which are very catastrophic for a person's iman and faith. So number 1 was shirk. Number 2 was this intentional murder of someone. Number 3 was is qadhaful muhsana, to accuse a chaste woman of committing adultery, to make an accusation that this woman who is a chaste mu'min, that she committed some kind of lewd act like that. That's a great sin. Aklu riba abad al-bayyinah. The next one is usury. We talked a little bit about riba. Obviously, there's some instances where it's not technically considered problematic, but the general idea of usury, and which is very prevalent in most businesses and banks and things, that's problematic. وَالْفَرَارُ مِنَ الزَّحْفِ. The next one is running away from the battlefield. So there's a war, there's a battle, the Muslims are being attacked, and they're defending themselves. One person cowers and they run away and they leave, they cause something to happen or Muslims to get hurt. This running away from the battlefield, this is considered one of the great sins. Fleeing the fight. The next one is وَتَعَرُّبْ بَعْدَ الْهِجْرَةِ, losing faith or losing religion after migrating. This is the one that we are actually talking about. Losing the religion after you migrate to this, to some non-Muslim land. You leave Darul Islam, meaning the land where there's predominantly Muslims there, or Islam is being practiced. You go to Darul Kufr, where the predominantly non-Muslim lands, and as a result of that, a person loses their faith. This is one of the other ones. وَعُقُوقُ الْوَالِدَيْنِ, right? The person who is rude and causes their parents to become dissatisfied with them, unhappy with them, that is considered one of the great sins as well. And aklul mal al-yatim dhulman, to abuse the property or the wealth of the orphan, of the yatim. Take their property, their wealth, what belongs to them, misuse it somehow. Got those? How many do we have?
So that's 7. I noted down: shirk, murder, accusing a chaste woman of adultery, usury, circumstantial, running from battle, losing faith after migrating to a foreign land, to a non-Muslim land, disenfranchising or your parents, and misusing or abusing the wealth or the sustenance of the orphans.
Okay, that should be 8.
That is 8.
That is 8.
Yeah.
But the hadith started out that there's 7.
Yeah.
So Imam alayhi salam made a mistake? No. He goes on to explain that the reason why he's mentioned 8, but said that the kaba'ir or the great sins are only 7, is because ta'arrub and shirk are the same. The losing faith after migration and shirk are considered the same. So it's like, wow. Like shirk, which is in some books considered the greatest of all sins, is on the same page as this ta'arrub. And the Imam is explaining that in this hadith. That's a big, big statement. It means that the situation and understanding our role means that if we're losing our faith in this country, then it's a major problem. Being here becomes a major problem. Our existence here, if we're not practicing our faith, if we're not practicing as well as we can, it's a problem. Now, I want to put this with the other hadith, that the last hadith I want to mention was, there's a hadith that talks about a man who frequented the Darul Kufr, the non-Muslim lands. It's back and forth, maybe he was doing business or he had some travel reasons, but he was going to non-Muslim lands, he was back in the Muslim lands, back and forth. So he said that he comes to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, I heard if I die in Darul Kufr, if I die with the disbelievers, then on Yawm al-Qiyamah, I'm going to be raised up as one of them. Right? He said, I heard this. Is this true? So the Imam asks him one question, basically. Or he wants to make one point or 2 questions he asks him. He says, when you're in Darul Islam, when you're in the Muslim lands, do you propagate the religion? Do you share about the affairs of the Ahlul Bayt and the teachings? He said, when I'm in the Muslim lands, no, like everyone is already Muslim. There's already people that do that. I don't. He said, what about when you're in Darul Kufr? When you're in the non-Muslim lands, do you propagate the religion? Do you share the message? He said, yes, I always share about the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. And the Imam said, because of what you do in Darul Kufr, on the day of judgment, you will be raised up as one ummah. You yourself will be raised up as one nation with nur bayni yaday, with light coming from you. You know, you have this grand status of like what the prophets have, raised because the prophets are raised with their ummah. You will be raised with as an ummah yourself because of the way that you, the role that you have as upholding Islam within that context of Darul Kufr, of the non-Muslim lands. It's phenomenal. It's incredible. That speaks to our task of, if we are to be here, then we have a responsibility to be practice our religion. Number one prerequisite, we have to know our religion well. We have to be educated about our religion well. We have to be educated about the circumstances of this land. And then we have to share that message and propagate that message. And that can look like different things, but we have to be on that front. If we're following, you know, that path, that is the path of connecting to the question of Imam Zaman, Ajalullah Ta'ala Farajul Sharif, where it says, Afdalul A'mal or Khairul A'mal, the best of all actions is Intidarul Faraj. The best of all actions is awaiting the Imam. Well, it's not sitting back twiddling thumbs waiting. It's not sitting back sipping on lemonade waiting. No, it's proactive waiting. That proactive waiting means the revolution of the self and self-building, and then that trickles to doing things in some social sphere and propagating the teachings of the Ahl al-Bayt in society.
Jazakallah, Shaykh. So we have about a half an hour left, and I wanted to open up kind of for questions. I know in the chat there was a question. If you guys have any questions, feel free to either drop that in the chat or raise your hand, and you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, the question about, you know, Thanksgiving, I think, is always a relevant one because, well, you know, it's about that time of the year, and it's, to me, it speaks about it's a couple of things. So one is, what is this even about? You know, because for one thing, I really can't, and not just Thanksgiving, it's a lot more, even Christmas. I still can't figure this out, like how Muslims became more advocates of the holidays than any American that I know. Like, I have a lot of non-Muslim family. They don't go hard like Muslims do. Like, they might not have a tree, but I know Muslims that religiously, like, they will have their trees and their lights, and they'll be, you know, their ugly sweaters, the whole nine. You know, they take it really serious. And I'm just like, I can't figure this out. You know, Prophet, you know, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's birthday came around, and you were like, alhamdulillah, you know, back to work, you know, just another day in the office, you know, like literally, did you go shopping then? Did you buy presents then? Did you celebrate anyway? Any lights up on your house? No, I actually don't want anybody to know, you know, that I'm Muslim. I'm kind of hiding, you know, that's why I got the Christmas lights, bro. You know, so it's really interesting to see that kind of distance. And that may speak to that same concept of like, listen, if you get into that situation and you can't maintain your pride in being Muslim and you need to assimilate to the local culture, which may not really be so much Islamic, then in that case, that becomes a problem. I think that understanding at this time is understanding things, the context of, like I've been talking about, understanding the reality of this country and how the system works and injustices that exist. I think the same goes for the history. You know, there wasn't any powwow or Native Americans or hanging out with the, you know, quote unquote pioneers that came here. It was definitely not like that, you know, not according to, you know, the real history. And so that needs to be understood. You know, that's a type of injustice. I go sit on somebody's land and then I own it all of a sudden. You know, I take it, I own it, and I put them on a reservation. Like, that's the kind of um, that's a huge kind of injustice. You know, I was talking with some students about mass shootings. You know, that topic came up, and you know they were talking about this mass shooting, this happened, that happened, and you know, there's so many of them. Unfortunate, you know, situations and circumstances, and people whose lives are lost, unfortunately, in that process. And I said, you know about the worst mass shooting? You know, no, they don't know about Wounded Knee. You know, Wounded Knee, South Dakota, almost 300 Native Americans are slaughtered. Um, there's no idea about what that is or what happened. There's no understanding about that connection. And so maybe revisiting what is the history of Native Americans in this country, you know, revisiting, you know, what is that all about? I remember when I was doing some research, I was writing an article, you know, about Islam in America after 9/11, and in my research, I wanted to kind of give some historic context of Islam in America, and there is evidence that uh, some Native Americans may have been Muslim or had some contact with Muslims, definitely. There were people who came from West African countries way pre-Columbus that were Muslim and had some interactions. There's papers, agreements, whatever. Maybe they did some trade. Maybe they intermarried. There's evidence of that presence of Islam even early on. Some things in museums even and stuff like that. I was reading, I forget the name of one of the books that talks more in detail, but I cited it in an article. But my point is that even that idea of like Islam having this connection to, you know, America pre, you know, colonization and pre-colonizers, you know, all of that. This is something that is important to understand. You know, what is this history? What Native Americans, is that all, you know, because these images of what are presented, are these is this all that there is? So Native Americans are just dancing and feathers, and you know what I'm saying? Like that's all there is to know. You know, there's no rich history, there's no understanding or the people, they don't have, you know, any kind of real history. Like history starts in Europe all the time. Every textbook that I read, you know, the first person I remember taking a stat class, you know, from my PhD program some semesters ago. We had to take the statistics. History of statistics starts with somebody in Europe. You know what I mean? Like not the Muslims that, you know, where algebra and these kind of things were at the forefront of mathematics. Nope, everything started, you know, in Europe. But this Eurocentric mindset of things is something that promotes that same kind of othering of everybody else and their culture and their background and stuff like that. And it's no different when it comes to Native Americans. Just pick up any textbook in school. You know what I mean? What are we teaching? What are they teaching kids? You know, okay, history of America. One page, Native Americans, they were there, now they're not. Slavery, it's like one page again. And then you get into all of these things about George Washington and, you know, this patriotic stuff and this and that. And these are, you know, your whole book is about that. You know, so those kind of diminishing of these major events and things like that are really unfortunate. And in the Quran, it says, Siru fil arth. Travel the earth and see the plight of those that came before you. See what happened to those that came before you, you know, and not just those who were, you know, wanted to be the rulers and their establishments were toppled, but also learn from those others that came before you, you know, the people in this land, you know, like, you know, the Native Americans, like, you know, the Lakota people and that were massacred in Wounded Knee. So yes, there's a lot of history in terms of what really happened in Thanksgiving. I think that should be an emphasis for Muslims in terms of understanding what really happened, more so than just trying to assimilate and follow what they think is what society is doing or following. Hassan, thank you.
Jazakallah, Shaykh. Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Raza, you're unmuted.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. Just very question I had was regarding voting. I know for a lot of us whose parents are immigrants here, they were either told not to vote as they came here, or they just learned Islamically that it's better not to vote. But recently we've seen a little bit of a transition, especially here in Houston. People who haven't voted, they're starting to vote. We had an event at the center about a year ago. We registered about 60, 70 people to vote. But even with that, we still hear a mix from our scholars, whether it is okay to vote, what we should be voting on, etc. I think for the most part, from the scholars that we've heard from, at least here in Texas, is that local elections is something you should definitely be voting for. But as far as the rest of it goes, especially with the national, with the special interest and stuff, it's better to avoid it. Some people are saying not at all. So where do you kind of fall into that? And what is our responsibility as young American Muslims regarding voting in all aspects, not just in local elections, but in national elections as well?
Great question, Brother Reza. Thank you for asking that. So I'm going to preface my question with giving you another example, and then I'm going to come back to that. Just pay close attention. So there's, you have what is called istifta'at, which is like, you're questioning and seeking a fatwa or a ruling. And so people will send to marjas, to scholars, to their offices to get a ruling about something. Context matters a tremendous amount. So I was actually just talking with one of the ulama about this. So you have people will send questions to the same marja, right? And it'll say something like, actually, these are actual questions. Both of these are actual questions people send and ask. And I'm going to explain, a little bit more about them. Is it okay for me to, isn't it haram to have Christmas tree and Christmas lights up when this is a pagan holiday of origin, something that's, basically equivalent to idol worshiping and has no basis in Islam and is emulating non-Muslims or emulating disbelievers? Isn't that something that's not permissible? Response: no, it's not permissible. Same office. So when it says this question, around the holidays in America, we're Muslims, we're minority, and we're trying to uphold the good values of Islam and honor the great Prophet Isa alayhi salam. And one of the ways of us doing and honoring him is by commemorating Christmas, etc., etc. And this is a great way to honor him and honor this prophet who's also, in part of the monotheistic religions. Is it okay to honor Prophet Isa? Yes, this is permissible. So essentially, it's kind of like people who already have in their mind their answer, and I want us to pay close attention to our intentions in this, because the person who wanted to hear that it's haram, they frame the question in a way where the context makes it problematic. The person who is like, no, I really like doing this, and I want to frame it in a way where the context allows me. So the context matters a lot. Okay, that's the point. And the intention behind that also matters a lot, because we should try to be objective in what we're seeking, not just the person's like, I think this, I really want this, so I'm going to ask, ask a question in a particular way. To voting. I'll share with you one of the Maraja, Ayatollah Hadavi Tehrani. He has a ruling where he says, and I'm a little bit paraphrasing it, but basically he says that if it will be beneficial for the Muslims, then it's encouraged for them to participate in elections, whatever elections there are. And so it was really interesting. I posted this on Facebook or Instagram or something, and then I was getting these responses. It was in my stories, and I'm getting these messages like, thank you, Shaykh. Yeah, this proves that this is haram. And then the next one would say, thank you, Shaykh. This proves that this is wajib, you know? And it was like so interesting, the different takes on the same statement. I think that what was missed again was the proper kind of this, in some ways, the sincerity and intention. If I want to look at this objectively, then I have to ask the question of what the fatwa is saying. It's talking about benefit of the Muslims. You know, what does that mean, the benefit of the Muslim? That's the question that I should be talking about and trying to understand. Is there truly a benefit or not, and all of that? And so with some of that in mind, yes, you do get the idea that definitely, you know, as well, let me put it this way: organizational theory, there's an idea that you cannot ever change any system without changing the fundamental pieces of it, right? Otherwise, you're like adding stuff to it, but the fundamental pieces will always be the same. You know, like you can take a Pinto or a Paycon or some just really raggedy car. You can take a Volkswagen Bug and you can put a Lamborghini Chassis on it, you know, but that doesn't make it a Lamborghini, right? There's still the same engine under the hood. That doesn't change anything. So just changing the colors, changing the surface doesn't change the system. And so that becomes part of the important discussion around this idea in this country is, are you changing the system? Does it make any change in that benefits the Muslims? These are the important questions that we have to ask. Like, you know, if it was Trump or Obama or Clinton or Bush, did anybody ever say that we're opposed to Israel? No, that's a fundamental piece of the system that will never be changed. That is an integral part of this system that can never be changed. So it doesn't matter what's on the surface changes. That's a fundamental piece. And there are many of these fundamental pieces that are impossible to change. Like, it would literally have to be a revolution of system, a complete discarding and of the system completely for there to be a change. Those are pieces of the system which are not going to be changed. So the question in that case comes more about whether or not it's going to be really beneficial to Muslims or not. Now, I want to end with my recommendation and suggestion. It doesn't really matter who is in this position. I could argue that people woke up to certain realizations about the ugliness of America only during the Trump era, that otherwise they couldn't see, and they didn't think that they existed. People didn't think that America was xenophobic, or, you know what I mean, that America was racist. Like, really, like, people didn't believe it. So Trump opened up their eyes. For that, we have to say thank you, DJ, you know, for opening up people's eyes to the reality that there's these things that are happening. Again, that complacency, that enemy where he lulls you to sleep and makes you feel like everything's going to be fine. The Muawiyah of the time, that, or the other people who kind of lull people to sleep and make them kind of pretend. These are much, much more dangerous than the person who says, hey, I'm the bad guy, I'm your enemy, and this is what I don't like about you. It might ruffle people's feathers. First time you've seen Muslims coming out, you know, protesting about things, afraid of Muslim ban, this and that. But these are not things that are really necessarily completely new. The system existed the same way. People were having travel problems for years and decades. People were on no-fly lists for decades. This is not something new, but it was in your face and in the open, and so that kind of prompted people. And that, if anything, that part of it was a good thing. Not that we're saying that the person was good, but there's this seeing the glass half full of whatever the circumstances are. There's a danger to an enemy that tells you that they're your friend. Most of the ayahs of the Quran are about what? The munafiqeen, the hypocrites. They're the most dangerous people. You know, not the open mushrikeen. I'm not worried about those people who are like, I'm the bad guy, I'm the enemy. Oh, those people who say, no, I'm with you, I'm your friend. You know, but really they're stabbing you in the back. Those are the biggest dangers. So what is the recommendation? What do Muslims need to do? More important than anything else, Muslims need to organize, and then they need to have a unified voice. That is more powerful than any kind of vote at all. Think about this. If 1 million Muslims, 2 million, 10 million, whatever the number is of Muslims in America gets together, if half of them can agree on one thing, just imagine this. All of the Muslims agree that Muslim marriage is not allowed. It shouldn't be a thing. Do you understand the power of that voice? No, we don't understand, because we're going and we're like, you know, a couple people protest here, a couple people protest there. We don't understand the power of ourselves. We're more concerned about what it is this. We've been indoctrinated to believe that the solution to fixing and reforming the system is the system itself. So the system says, oh, you don't like these problems? Then you should vote. Then if you don't vote, then you're not helping to fix the problems. Where's your civic engagement? Get involved and help to fix the problems of the system. No, these are fundamental. Why do the problems exist? Why are there these problems? These should not be able to exist. No police officer should be able to kneel on a man for 9 minutes. That should not be possible. It's possible because the system has allowed these things to exist. Right? So, if we as a voice came and said, we demand this or we demand that, then you can get something. So where's the real work that has to be done? It's not in the voting booth. It's in the Muslim communities. That's where the real work has to be done. Because that is the real work. That is the hard work. Come on. If you live in Houston, how many centers do you have? Every time I ask somebody that, it was like, I think it's 5. No, I think it's 7. I think it's 10. I think it's 13 now. I think it's 15. No, I think it's 20.
9.
Like, what is the number in? How many?
It's 9.
It's 9?
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Pretty sure it was like 10. Low key.
It's a lot. Point is that can these Muslims come together and organize something, anything, even something small? Can they organize and just agree on Karbala? Can we just agree on Ramadan? Can we just agree on some basic things where we can come together and be a unified voice? We have so much work to do internally that is far more valuable than the work of being dependent upon a system which is inherently and fundamentally flawed. We have to do the work of ourselves. If we can do things like being able to find common ground with other Muslims, if we can do that, oh, we have done a tremendous thing. That would be like... That in and of itself would be an amazing feat. We're not able to do that. We have not yet done that. We have conferences, we have events, but have we been able to unify our voice? When you have like 60-40 voting for Trump and Biden, that in and of itself tells the whole story right there. Even if we wanted to be impactful at that level, it will require that all of the Muslims are kind of on the same page and are coming and saying, boom, we're putting our vote here because we're getting X, Y, Z of these demands met. We're benefiting the Muslims, but we're not able to do that. So our work, which is the work that people don't want to do, which is the work that is always avoided because we have so much internal conflict. Every place where there was, think about this, almost every city in North America, every major city, about 3 decades ago, there was one center. Every single one of those major cities, those centers split like cellular reproduction. They just split, and then those two split, and then those other ones split, and then those other ones split. Sometimes I go places, I was traveling, and people ask me, how many centers are in Denver? I say, about 5 centers or so. MashaAllah, brother, that's so good. Why is that so good? Why? Because we like numbers, we like statistics. The more people, the more numbers. Do you think that that's good? Is it really good? If that was one unified place that became 5 disunified places, hypothetically, is that good? Does that help us? Does that help our cause? Does it help our strength? One of the masjids in Islam had to be burnt to the ground. Masjid Darar, burnt to the ground. It was harming Islam. It was not a benefit for Islam or Muslims. Community is not a physical space. It's the people and relationships. Are we able to build those people and relationships? Do we cut off ties with people, with communities completely, excommunicate people? If we're not able to mend or do the things that mend, then we haven't been able, we're not doing the work. I'm gonna leave this question on this note. Again, going back to that same, it was cited here, I think, Imam Ali alayhi salam's will. What did he say? He said, better than all of fasting and prayer. Think about this. This is Imam Ali alayhi salam after the darbat, after being struck. That fatal blow where he's about to become shaheed and leave this world, he's telling us better than in that holy month of Ramadan, all of the fasting, which it says it's the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what did he say about that month? The month is the best of month. The days are the best of days. Your breathing is an ibadah and worship. He's saying better than all of that? Better than all of the salat that you can make? It's salahu dhat al-bayn, is bringing together two believers who have stopped talking to each other, who have gotten estranged. What is he saying? He's saying building community, building people together, lowering and being humble, being able to forgive, being able to admit you're wrong, being able to come together. This is more valuable than just you making salat even. The first question on Yawm al-Qiyamah be about your salat. It says this is more important than that. So what this tells us is that the organizational building of Muslims within the Muslim community is the top most important priority when it comes to the practical thing that we need to do more than anything else.
Can I ask a question? Or
Sure. So we there's one question that somebody has messaged us, and then you can go ahead and ask a question right after that.
Brother, do you have something follow up?
Yeah, but is it a follow up to that?
No, it's fine. You can go ahead.
Okay, we'll come back around.
Okay. So question is, Salam Shaykh, can you discuss the concept of barakah? How does one earn barakah in his or her time? Barakah in rizq, or even in his tawfiq?
So barakah is our divine blessing. It's Allah's grace. It comes from, first and foremost, not skipping the steps. What I mean by not skipping the steps is we have to have a priority. Like, for example, when it comes to, there's a group of people. There's an actual group. Every weekend, they get together and they do matam once a week or something like that. They're very committed to the idea of mourning for Imam Husayn and remembering him in that way. And at this gathering, one of the people was there, said, I came there for the first time and I was so impressed at how committed these brothers were that they were doing, this is not, like every day is Kabbalah was kind of their thing. That even if it's not Muharram, that we're going to remember. And so he said, I was very impressed until the time for Maghrib prayer came in. And they said, we're doing matam right now. Like, we'll pray later. And they continued to beat their chest and recite nohas, and they put their salat on the back burner. Some people didn't pray at all. Hours later, that's not prioritizing. They're thinking that they're doing something good and getting Allah's grace and barakah. But Imam Husayn alayhi salam was on the battlefield making salat. And we haven't understood what he stood for, right? So prioritizing what is our obligation in Allah's eyes is very important. If Allah said this is an obligation for you, then that is the means of receiving and attaining barakah. And then after that, everything that is recommended is the next path to barakah. Right? So, for example, if salat is something that's wajib, I can't miss it. Missing it is not an option. But if I really want to get the barakah, then I make my salat on time, for example, right? There's a hadith that talks about the benefits of each prayer. Every prayer, obviously, has so many benefits, but each prayer has certain particular spiritual benefits. It says that, for example, the morning prayer is nur al-wajh, the light of your face. The light sometimes is even a metaphor for a person's intellectual depth and understanding. Sometimes a person, you see, they feel like they have a nur to them, that kind of this kind of halo of light, with them. The midday prayer, the dhuhr prayer, it says is a person's rizq and sustenance. Right? This is the barakat of your rizq in your midday prayer. And it's really ironic when people say something like, I can't pray because I have to work, because I have to earn money. When Allah is saying your prayer, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is saying your prayer is in this time, is in abandoning that work and stopping and praying and remembering him. That is your rizq. So we want barakat. It's exactly in this path of first understanding what's our obligation, and then understanding what's the best way to do that obligation. Understanding, for example, prayer is wajib, then understanding the best way to do that, to pray on time, to pray with a presence of mind and heart when we pray. The quickest way to lose our rizq and barakat is to do something hurtful to another human being. It will be gone like that. Hurtful to our parents, hurtful to another believer, harming someone else and backbiting them. If I have a business and I don't pay my employee, anything that harms someone else, that is the quickest way to remove barakah from our life. And hence the importance of this idea of social justice.
Thank you for that, Shaykh. Jazakallah. Do we have any more questions? So I actually had a question, kind of I guess, follow up to a lot of what you talked about. There's so much to obviously unpack, and a big point that you made consistently throughout your talk today was the importance of understanding the material conditions of the time and understanding what the oppressions of the time are, so that we can act on that. Even that itself is a really big thing. What would you recommend as like a good place to start in terms of gaining that knowledge, and in terms of, I guess, so two parts: one in terms of gaining that understanding, and two in terms of organizing as a community?
Okay, so the first part of that about where to start, there was one list that was put in there. I think that's a good start. It has a few different reading and some different materials that are really helpful points to kind of understand the system that which we live in, how it impacts people. And I think that the other part of that would be how important it is to be connected to people who have the lived experience. You know, it's one thing to kind of like, I don't know, to read something about Islam, but when you know a Muslim, it changes your perspective of things, right? How many people like are sitting somewhere like way in suburbia, never met a Muslim, never talked to anybody, never read anything about Islam, really, or just was only informed by, you know, whatever Fox News told them, and then all of a sudden they have this negative perception. Well, of course they do, you know, that, and then maybe they do read something, but they just Googled Islam, and, you know, the first thing that came up probably wasn't, you know, Shaykh Mutahari's book on it. You know, it was probably some rando writing some crazy stuff. And then, so that's their, you know, opinion. Or it's something like, you know, I am interested in what is all this Ashura all about? And then you go to Google and you type in Ashura, and what's the first thing that comes up? Bloody people, bloody kids, and, you know, this. And that's the only image that people have, you know? And so knowing someone directly changes a lot, you know? Knowing someone who's like, no, I actually, this is what I do every Muharram. This is what, how I live. Oh, that makes a big difference, you know? Someone hearing about police brutality, so I can like, listen, I can tell you about some things firsthand. This is what it's like. This is what it really is like. That can change a perception of people, a deeper understanding when you're talking about lived experiences. So I think that there's definitely good works out there. And I think that it's important to have that connection with people who have the lived experiences. And the last part I will say is that it's important to ask questions. It's very important to be accustomed to and not shy to ask, you know, questions about things, you know, and even if they may be perceived as being something that's not a good question or something like that, it's important to ask, to understand, you know, what is this like? Why is this, you know, like this? Like, I don't understand, you know, to be able to try to hopefully get some more depth and understanding. And obviously always ask those who know, you know, whether that's the lived experience or academic or scholarly understanding, that's important. The second part about organizing, there is a prerequisite to any kind of organizational activity. You cannot do organizational activity of significant and effective success without having the component of trust. Okay, this is very important. So part of the thing that happens a lot of times is that organizational activities are oftentimes very much superficial activities and not activities of a group with trust, you know. So some people come together and they protest. Is there trust? Trust is the prerequisite for brotherhood. Is there brotherhood? I mean, really, do these people know each other? Do they interact on a personal level? Have they visited one another? Are they? Do they trust each other? Can this person? Would you confidently, the people who you're working with in this organization, would you give them all the money in your account and say, "Hey, just hold this for me. I'll be right back." You know what I mean? Like, what kind of level of comfort is there in terms of trusting one another? That becomes very important in terms of wanting to organize something. Otherwise, you're organizing on a very, very low level. Think about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. There's an effort, in a group effort of working with, even working with Imam Ali alayhi salam, or some of the close companions. There's a trust factor there, you know, with Imam Ali. Trust factor to sleep in his bed, you know, when the enemies are coming to attack. A trust factor makes a really big difference. And that's one of the things that I think that oftentimes is overlooked, especially in the Muslim community. We see where there are people that are working together, but maybe they don't have that real trust, together. That's something that has to be built through understanding, through dialogue, through interpersonal relationships, through engagement. Um, that's something that has to be built over time. That gives value to that organizational work that needs to be done. But it's also directly connected to what I mentioned before about the idea that the community building within the Muslim community is a priority for Muslims to be not just making a difference in society, but preparing for the dhuhr. It's about the Muslims coming together.
Sorry. Thank you, Shaykh. So do we have any other questions for Shaykh today? You really dropped a lot of gems today. So if we don't have any other questions, then I'll just ask if you could do, because there was so much today, if you could just do a real brief, just kind of few takeaways that you would want us to leave this conversation with, to keep in mind moving forward.
I think let's do this. There was a lot to unpack, alhamdulillah. I'd like to ask everybody who listen to type in your takeaways in the chat, one or two things, and let's kind of consolidate those things. Let me see if anybody was actually listening, just chilling on Zoom today. Just type in a takeaway, or you can feel. I'm fine with also if you want to say it under the mic if it's easier.
I think what you talked about with societies and the oppressed in our community and continuing to keep them as a priority was something that stuck out to me. In general, you gave the example of the Holy Prophet and the Imams, and I'm in a class right now called Politics in the Quran, and I'm also in this class about Quran as literature in comparison to the Bible. And all of the holy texts that we've been looking at, they've always been emphasizing how important it is that the lower class societies were those who the prophets of those times always seemed to have the best connection with, and those are the people who need our help the most, so we shouldn't abandon them.
MashaAllah, Ahsan. Great takeaway. I can definitely, commend that a lot. What we know about the hadiths about Prophet Isa alayhi salam, for example, is so much what we know about the Prophet. So much of that is about their how they treated people. They kind of reestablished the balance that when society comes really in balance and the elites and everyone else kind of happens, they help to reestablish that structure. And yes, Ahsan.
I think a big takeaway that I got was kind of what you first talked about in the beginning of the event, how people have to recognize that there is a problem in order to fix it. You can't just be like, okay, let's end racism, but then you have to recognize okay, what are the racist systems? And then how we can even relate that to ourselves, and maybe just be aware of any inner biases that we may have, because if we're oblivious to them, we're just we're not fixing the problem.
That's a great point, and I forgot to mention about that, but implicit biases is one of the really big things which helps a person to really understand, because it's not it's like a person doesn't want to sometimes, but they don't even realize they're just completely they're overshadowed by this. But that also helps with having good, honest relationships and good friends and people of different circles, that can say to you hey, such and such a thing, this is this kind of thinking, or oh, you're like, wow, I didn't even think about that, or something, so that's a great point. Thank you. Let me tackle some of these there in the chat as well. Thank you, everyone. Sister Layla says, and Assalamu alaikum, Sister Layla. Thank you, Shaykh Husayn. Unity of purpose and unity of expression. Get to know each other, justice and love. That's beautiful, and that's very key. You know, Imam Hussein's like. I remember I was giving a lecture at a quick story. I was giving a lecture at a university. It wasn't a lecture actually. They were having a event because the university had a new president, and so they're in a big event. They invite all these people, invite the interfaith community, and so I was there, and they asked everyone to talk for like 1 or 2 minutes, welcome the new president, share something, some gift or something like that, and so. Different people share different things, and there was some other person there. I knew that they were going to share a Quran, so I didn't want to be redundant, and so I shared this image, this picture of the Zari of Karbala, the shrine of Imam Hussein inside the mausoleum, and alayhi salam, and I said to them just in a few words, just trying to really capture, all these people are non-Muslim, right? 1,000 people that are non-Muslim, trying to help them to understand what does this mean. I said, this is the most visited place on the planet Earth, drop the mic, kind of thing. Afterwards, you're like, so many people are like, what is that about? Like, where is this place? What is that even about? So many questions about, what does that represent? And yet we have that. And we don't really value like how that can be such a powerful connection to bring ourselves together, So that idea of connecting and that purpose of unity, I think that's really important. Musa Sayed, student from way back in the day. Alhamdulillah. Shaykh being equated to Ta'arrub, actually with a B, Ta'arrub Bad al-Hijra is something that stood out to me. That I definitely explained that to people, and it's been like, whoa, like I never even heard of that, let alone it being, equivalent to shirk. And it's a big thing. And as I remember back when, when I was studying and I read this, it made me really think a lot about how sometimes the reason why the A'imma use certain words or strategy in speaking is solely for emphasis. Like the Imam could have said there's 8 things, right? And outlined it like that, or could have just said, hey, these 2 things are the same, like from the beginning. But the way that he spoke, that eloquence, made it digestible, but it made it also that lump in your throat where it's like, oh my gosh, like that's serious stuff right there. So I'm glad that stood out to you. It always stands out to me. Even every time I read it, it just, makes, shiver a little bit, like, wow, like that could be shirk. Sister Sakina, the system is corrupt and oppressive, run by oppressive people, values, ideologies, history. We need to build unity and alternatives. Beware of our own hypocrisy, apathy, and complacency. Islam is the answer through Quran and Ahlul Bayt as directed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Absolutely. Complacency can be in this context very dangerous, as we've pointed out a lot of times. I hope that that's a takeaway that everyone gets, because it will help us to be on our toes, during the time, not just in Kufa, like in Sham too, like part of the reason maybe why people were complacent, Sham was considered, where Yazid is running this cosmopolitan city, you know what I mean? And it's upscale. And so it's very easy for people to overlook that, I think about, one of the most beautiful hadith, it's just so sad too. It's so sad. Is when the caravan arrives when they arrive in Kufa, the story of the old man, because he's like cheering and happy, and he's like, yeah, I got the bad guys, and everything like that. And then Imam Sajjad kind of steps to him and says, do you know this ayat of the Quran? And he goes ayah after ayah, the ayah of Tatir, the ayah about khums, the ayah about that you don't ask for any kindness except for the love of the near ones. All of these ayats about the Ahl al-Bayt in the Quran. And then he said, yes, I know this one. Yes, I know that one. Every time he said, well, we're those people, by the way. We're that Ahl al-Bayt. And every time this person, he starts like, you're those people in the Quran? You're chained and, you're being paraded around? You're the people? It says that he's wearing an imama, like a turban. He takes it off and throws it on the ground and just starts crying and weeping because he's so shocked that he was complicit in a way in the injustice that happened to the Ahl al-Bayt who were mentioned, in the Quran over and over again. Yet he thought he was on the right side. That complacency is very dangerous, and you become complicit in the problem. Yeah, I think that, those covers those things in the chat. Asant, absolutely. There is no external revolution without internal revolution. There is no real external revolution. There can be superficial things that happen, like that would be the Arab Spring. Remember that? That was the external without any internal. Internal revolution has those kind of elements of true trust, true brotherhood, sacrifice, leadership that we're clearly missing. Any other questions, thoughts, comments, feedback, takeaways?
All right. So if nobody has any further questions or comments, Musa. All right.
Always, bro. Always.
Inshallah, this pandemic will end soon and we'll get to hoop together.
Inshallah. Look forward to that.
No, he's a cold shooter, man. You don't want to play against him.
Let's see.
He was my PE teacher, man. It was hard.
You're a PE teacher at Al-Hadi?
Yeah.
Nice. That's cool. That's great.
Islamic study, PE, the whole nine.
You're in academia right now as well, right? Do you teach?
No, right now, I definitely do teaching on, focus is more like, classes, courses, workshops, like what we're doing, stuff like this. Classes are like small groups of people or things like that. But yeah, I'm doing my PhD at University of Denver right now in education.
Great. Well, inshallah, this is the first of many conversations we'll get to have, inshallah. The topics that you touched on today were really critical, and especially in, the modern day where there's so much going on in society, and we have a veneer of, options. And hopefully this, has stimulated some thought in all of us, and inshallah we can discuss further on these matters and on other matters as well. So just to let everybody know again, follow us on Twitter and Instagram if you're not already. We're at ABSO. On Facebook, Ahl al-Bayt Student Organization at the University of Houston. And before we conclude, if we can end with a dua for our tawfiq regarding these issues and for the Imam of our time.
Inshallah, let's be very intentional with, presence of mind and heart to renew our commitment, you know, understanding that the Imam is not, that we're not just waiting for him, but he's waiting for us. You know, inshallah, let's recite Dua Faraj together. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم كن لوليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. صلوات.
اللهم صل
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى